Good evening, hello and welcome. You're watching Viewpoint. I'm Anusha Soni. The National Assembly in Pakistan was dissolved on the 9th of August after its term ended. A caretaker government in the neighbouring country under Anwaar-ul-Haq Kakar has been formed with 16 federal ministers and about 3 advisors. Amongst them is Mushaal Hussain Malik. She is the wife of Yasin Malik. We all know who Mohammad Yasin Malik is. He is the man who was found guilty in a terror funding case and supporting unlawful anti-India activities. The man who was convicted by an NIA court and serving a life sentence in Tihar jail. The man whose deep-rooted connections and activities with Pakistan were aimed at fostering terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. All of these facts are not hidden. This man who became a pawn in Pakistan's proxy warfare strategy, allowing them to exert influence in the region through terror-driven tactics. At a moment when NIA is seeking death penalty for him, Pakistan's caretaker government's move to include Yasin Malik's wife in Pakistan cabinet has clearly raised concerns. Now, Mushaal Hussain Malik has been appointed as Pakistan's minister's advisor, and the advisor is for human rights. The man who spilled blood in the valley for decades, his wife is now going to advise the Pakistan Prime Minister, even if it's the caretaker government, on human rights issue. What message exactly is Pakistan trying to send? Is this a direct message that Kashmir provocation will be rewarded and anti-India activities will be rewarded? More importantly, is this a move to appease the army establishment in Pakistan? Our focus on Viewpoint tonight.
भैया पाकिस्तान का मामला है, पाकिस्तान जो करना चाहे उसके लिए मुझे क्या कहना है। वो हम दो मुल्कों की बात है, आप तो गुजारिश करते हैं, उनकी बात है।
क्योंकि एक कंट्राडिक्शन है, एक तरफ से अगर वो ह्यूमन राइट्स के लिए कंसर्न है, दूसरी तरफ से उस शख्स को इस जगह पर तैनात करते हैं जिसके हस्बैंड मिलिटेंसी में इन्वॉल्वड हैं।
Well, what does this inclusion in the government really mean? We're joined by our guest also who would be with us on the broadcast. We've got the expert. Right now we have Mr. Sushil Pandit, who's a Kashmiri Pandit activist, a very important voice from the Kashmiri Pandit community who have raised the issues pertaining to the kind of activities that were conducted in the valley, the illegal killings that had happened, and more importantly, Yasin Malik and his alleged involvement in multiple murders and cases of arson and looting. Mr. Pandit, thank you so much for speaking with us. Thank you for joining us on Viewpoint tonight. The fact that Yasin Malik's wife has been included in the present government or in the caretaker government of Pakistan, what does it indicate? And she'll be advising the caretaker prime minister on human rights. That's rather more interesting, to say the very least.
And the fact that she has had no background in human rights activism, she has no papers, no interventions, nothing, no qualifications worth the name to suggest that she could be a prime minister's advisor in Pakistan, very clearly shows that the agenda is to dare Indian state. I repeat, it's throwing of a dare to see if no harm is meted to Yasin Malik.
No harm is meted out to Yasin Malik.
Challenging the Indian state.
Yeah.
Yes, they're challenging the Indian state with a threat that we will escalate it into an international issue by appointing his wife, Pakistani wife, to such an important position, so that it becomes an international issue, an issue of eminence and importance, when a petty jihadi, a self-confessed killer, mass murderer, is tried according to Indian law, punished and sentenced. If that is what Indian state does, then Pakistan would escalate it into a human rights issue through his wife, who's no less than an advisor to a caretaker prime minister.
I take that
in
point.
Pakistan.
Let me also introduce Mr. Rajiv Dogra, who's the former Indian ambassador, joining us on the broadcast. Rajiv ji, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on Viewpoint tonight. The inclusion of Yasin Malik's wife, well, the message I believe is pretty clear, that people who spread an anti-India propaganda will be rewarded in some form. Many experts argue that this is also the attempt of the caretaker government or the political establishment to reach out to the army. The relationship has been bittersweet in the last couple of years. But the fact that it's a caretaker government with a very limited term, do you think that they'll be able to create this propaganda, and will there be takers for it on an international stage?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. Now, coming to this question, the first thing that strikes my mind is, why do the Pakistanis do only half measures? Besides asking her to join as advisor to the interim Prime Minister, they should have also asked Dawood Ibrahim to become another advisor, because he could have collected hafta and helped the bankrupt Pakistan collect money. Then she could have used that propaganda much more effectively with a lot of money in her hand. Now, more seriously, just before this new government was sworn in, the previous Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, was literally requesting that let there be talks between India and Pakistan. Let's think in terms of peace, and let's think in terms of economic development. Now, within a week, I mean, they always say that a week is a long time in politics, but Pakistan is bent on making this week a horrible time in bilateral politics. Otherwise, there's no reason for appointing a person like her as advisor to the Prime Minister. What are her qualifications? Her qualifications are of a painter who paints half-naked models. So is that the advertisement for the new Pakistani cabinet? And is that the advertisement for human rights, of exploiting women? As far as Kashmir is concerned, her voice will not be effective, because hers is a voice of the Pakistani army. It's not going to be the voice of the so-called interim government, which is a puppet of the Pakistani army. So what are the intentions of Pakistani army? They are not directed towards United Nations General Assembly or towards G20 in South Africa, because people are clever, people are wise, they know what are the tricks, so they will not be fooled by this propaganda, but they would be aware that if she has been appointed, then Pakistan has some designs which cannot be called peaceful designs towards India.
There are no peaceful designs against India. Mr. Sushil Pandit, I think today is an occasion that we should talk more about Yasin Malik. The fact that he evaded the clutches of law for decades, the fact that he's been on record, quoted and admitting the offences that he had done during the violence that panned out in the 90s against Kashmiri Pandits and the community, the abductions, the killings that he has done. And finally, the process of justice caught up and he was arrested and convicted. There are various other trials which are still happening against him, and there is a demand that all cases that have been shut down should be once again reopened and reinvestigated.
You see, I wish I could share your enthusiasm on that. Yasin Malik has been prosecuted and convicted in a case dating 2016. This was terror funding case.
That's right.
This was case of waging war against India and belonging to a banned organization. It had nothing to do with massacres, killing, rapes and abductions that he committed 30 years back, 32 years back. In fact, those are the heinous crimes he should be tried for. 2, NIA took more than a year to appeal against life imprisonment and ask for death penalty when a clamor came up that, you've let him off lightly and you have not prosecuted him for the most heinous crimes. Number 3, I have a complete disagreement with the approach of Government of India.
Okay.
Justice Neelkant Ganju's murder was not a standalone murder as a result of enmity between him and his killers. Likewise, Director Doordarshan Lasakol or Shri Tikalal Taplu or Shri Premnath Bhatt or Girija Tikku or Sarla Bhatt and thousands others who were at the receiving end of jihad did not die because of these standalone atrocities against them. There is a pattern. This was a community targeted in order to cleanse them out, commit a genocide. If you treat them as standalone murders, it is like missing the forest for the trees.
No, you're right.
Murders,
this has been the demand of the community.
Give me 10 more seconds.
Sure.
If you try them as standalone murders, as happens in the peacetime, as happens in a civilized society, sometimes, these crimes happen, you are actually whitewashing a genocide. By treating these crimes as standalone crimes.
No, you're right, and this has been a long-standing demand from the community that these should be seen in the light of a violence that happened against a community and not standalone instances. We also have Mr. Farooq Renzu Shah, who's a former bureaucrat, and Mr. Kamar Chima, who's a defense expert, joining us on the broadcast. Good evening to all of you. Mr. Kamar Chima, coming to you and taking in a view from you. The fact that Yasin Malik's wife, Mushaal Hussain, has been included in the caretaker government, help us understand what her credentials are. The fact that her husband is facing serious charges here in India and the kind of track record he has had, it clearly raises questions about the designs of the caretaker government or the entire posturing of the political establishment in Pakistan.
Well, I think this is I'm so disturbed to see that the panelists here calling that why she can't be an advocate of human rights. Well, 10 years daughter of Yasin Malik and his wife, they both are asking for respect for Yasin Malik. They're asking that their father and her husband should be given a fair trial. The state of India have put them behind bars because you are powerful. You have made the entire Kashmir a jail. You have put the Kashmiris in jail. You have taken away the fundamental rights and the wife.
Let's, Mr. Chima, I'm aware. No. Let's not get provoked into an argument here. Let's address it one by one. Mr. Kamar Chima.
That's the only.
No, Mr. Kamar Chima. First of all, I don't think any human or legal rights of Yasin Malik have been taken away. He was charged under a certain case. There's a special court that heard his case, convicted him. He has a right to appeal like any other convict in this country. Old cases which the Kashmiri Pandit community are have been talking about, they have yet not been opened. So I think there is no plausible or substantial argument for you or anybody to argue that his legal rights have been taken away. In fact, the argument is that the process of law took more than 3 to 4 decades to catch up to a criminal like him who had openly admitted to crimes. And the fact that people like you support the likes of Yasin Malik shows that you are clearly supporting criminals and terrorists in this country.
Okay, the problem is that the law is not taking the courts in Manipur, in Gujarat and many other cities of provinces of India, but the law is taking
give him some education, please. Kamar Chima,
the Kashmiris and they
there
don't
are
have a
more
right
than
to
100
live.
convictions in
We
Gujarat.
understand. We do understand that
there are hundreds of people serving sentences in
Mr.
Gujarat.
Kamar Chima, I think when it comes to the internal affairs of Pakistan, there are far more things that I can argue when it comes to Balochistan, when it comes to various other provinces, or the fact that the economy is in a very bad condition right now, in a dire situation right now. Let's not get into the internal matters of each other. Sir, why don't you speak on the merits of the case? Why don't you speak on the merits of the case? What are the credentials of this very respectable woman to be included as an advisor to the caretaker government? Please explain that to me.
I think this is not a big deal for the state like India, which calls itself a mother of democracy, asking for a basic fundamental right for its citizens.
None of the fundamental right of any convict in this country have ever been taken away, including Ajmal Kasab. All have been accorded a fair trial in this country. Let me also bring in Mr. Farooq Renzu Shah into the discussion.
Yeah.
Sir, I don't think I'm going to get a direct answer over the credentials or the reasons why Mushaal Hussain has been included as an advisor to the caretaker Prime Minister. But it doesn't take too much of grey matter to add 2 + 2. We all know that this is perhaps a kind of message that the caretaker government is giving to India and also to the army establishment.
Yeah, I tell you, this act has now completely exposed the Pakistan fully now. Now, Pakistan has been from a 490, from the Zia-ul-Haq's time, they have created a chaos in our society, in Kashmir society. They brought the Islamic fundamentalism, those streams, 7 streams of Islam which were not existing. This was the Nizam-e-Mustafa type. And rightly, one of the panelists has rightly said, Neelkat Gunju was killed broad daylight. And the political party of that time, ruling class, were against them, let them be killed for 8 hours. Not a single policeman, cop, not a single politician, not a chief minister, not a DG came on spot and to save the dead bodies, even not a live body. Even they could not save the dead body. That was actually Pakistan was the creation of the violence. Now, I remember the same way they are using the Kashmir name. When Chuan Lai met Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah in Algeria, and they had to give our 11,000 square kilometer of Saichen to Pakistan, to China. They have to give them. They have to give them our Karakoram to give them. They used the name of Kashmiri leader and who has consented it to be gifted to the China. Our Sharai Abrashim was gifted to the China by same Pakistan. Pakistan is responsible for all our violences. Pakistan is responsible for mayhem. Pakistan is responsible for creating that class which has really.
So Mr. Rajiv Dogra, is it fair to conclude that any successive government which is sworn in Pakistan will never have an approach towards India which is about mending ties, restoring peace, resuming dialogue? Because the kind of messaging which is coming in, at least from the caretaker government, it's a completely anti-India position. Yasin Malik is a convict in this country. To have his wife appointed as an advisor on human rights, and with due respect, she has no credentials on being appointed as an advisor for human rights. I mean, I would have understood had she had a background, she was running an NGO or certain other activities. It's a clear anti-India message. I'll come to you, Mr. Kamarshima, on that. Mr. Dogra, please.
Well, you are right, absolutely. You are right, absolutely right, that one cannot depend on Pakistani establishment or its governments to act in a manner that promotes peace and amity between our two countries. But I must make a slight correction.
Sure.
The previous governments, whether of Benazir Bhutto, Nawaz Sharif or Shehbaz Sharif recently, they had at least tried in the beginning to take some steps which could have led to a dialogue. Not exactly peace, but led to a dialogue. Because even during their times, a large amount of terror had taken place and large amount of anti-India activities had taken place. But after those initial steps, they also fell into the same pattern that army dictates relationship with India. But this government, this new government, has exceeded all the expectations that anyone had, that this government will take some time at least to come to the army's track. This government has hit the ground running with a totally anti-India agenda by appointing Mushaal Hussain. And yesterday, in one of its first official spokesperson statement, they have listed 2 things which are extremely anti-India. One is on the human rights issue, the other is the safety of the cricketers when they come here to play cricket matches. Quite forgetting that only recently there was a Pakistani hockey team which went back very happy and absolutely safe and sound. So Pakistani agenda has changed drastically, and I think we have to look seriously in the future at what exactly their plans are.
Mr. Kamarshima,
I don't
Mr.
think
Kamarshima, I will
peaceful.
reiterate the question that I tried asking you earlier, and I hope there's a direct answer to that. Why is Pakistan interested in the case of Yasin Malik? More importantly, the direct question to you is he a stooge of Pakistan here in India?
Can you repeat the question?
Is Yasin Malik your stooge in India? Why are you interested in his case?
Well, anyone who is talking about and asking for the fundamental rights and they want that the Kashmiris should get a fair deal in India, you are calling them a stooge? So all those who are asking for the rights in India are the stooge. The people in Manipur are the stooges of China. So this is what the former Indian army chief had to say, that, oh, this is being done. So the question is, those who talk for the rights, you call them the stooge. The people in Manipur are the stooges are they talking for China? The Kashmiris are talking for Pakistan. What is an idea of India? Why people are not standing
So
with
we'll
you?
deal
Why
with
you
Manipur.
so
So
much
we'll
disturbed?
deal with Manipur. Why don't you talk about Yasin Malik?
A lady
So
in
we'll deal with
Pakistan
Manipur.
has
We
been-
are
has
aware
been
of the situation and we are a democratic
human
country.
rights minister
So we'll
and
deal
India
with
is
Manipur. We have
disturbed.
nothing to
Why?
hide. You go ahead and tell me why is Pakistan so interested in
Why India
Yasin
is
Malik?
disturbed if a lady who has been asking for her husband to be released is a problem for India? India is a country of
Released.
140 million people.
Yes.
Why you are disturbed with a lady? You understand this is a
Sir,
Hindu
Yasin
majoritarian
Malik,
government. Doesn't care about the
it's
human
an
rights.
elected government. It's not a Hindu majoritarian government. Secondly,
It's an elected Hindu
it's an
majoritarian government.
it's an
The
elected
question
government.
is-
It's
but
not
the
a Hindu
question is, the
majoritarian
board is
government.
talking about
Unlike
the human rights
Pakistan,
in India.
we do not
And
have
the
the
lady
Sharia
who
law
just
in India
asked
or
for
the Hindu law in
her
India.
husband to be released.
It's a country run by
And you
constitution,
have a
sir. I
problem
know
with
you're
that?
aware of this, aren't you?
I wish you should help Mushaal Malik to get her husband released.
How many
Please help
times?
Mushaal
Well,
Malik.
it is even contested the number of times she's visited India or he has visited her. Many people argue that this entire case of somebody trying to get back their husband is not really the right case to pursue, keeping in mind the kind of offences Yasin Malik has been convicted of, and God willing, a lot of cases need to be opened against him, which were done decades ago, and he needs
You
to
are
be
a
tried for that
powerful
as
state,
well.
you can even hang him.
I want to cut across to Mr.
You are
Rajiv
killing
Dogra as well. Mr. Rajiv
extrajudicial
Dogra,
killings happen
it's
in
interesting
Kashmir,
that
you can
Mr.
hang
Kamar
it so
Chima
fast.
says
There is no law
that
in
this is a lady who's fighting for the right of her husband, and the fact that she is appointed as an advisor on human rights, I believe, is a joke of sorts.
Well, I actually pity your Pakistani guest, because if you had asked him the same question 2 weeks back, when there was a sort of a democratic government in place, he would have admitted, yes, she is got questionable credentials, and Yasin Malik has committed huge crimes, and he should be tried as a criminal of the worst kind. But today he is afraid for his own human rights in Pakistan, because army is watching his every sound and every utterance. So I pity
I know
It is,
your Pakistani
I mean,
guest,
I don't even
because
want to
his
get on
safety-
that
his
whataboutery
safety-
about the
it's not
so-called
India.
records of
Very
human
concept
rights
for
in
them.
Pakistan,
Make
how
caricatures of
minorities
Prime
are
Minister Modi.
persecuted, how temples and churches are attacked, how forcible conversions happen, how there is an
Media
uproar in
for making a
Balochistan,
caricature
how
of
the
Prime
country
Minister
is on a
Modi.
brink
That's
of
a
an
mother of
economic collapse.
democracy. Don't
Well, we
lecture
still
us
wish you
anymore,
well,
please.
sir. We have Mr. Sushil Pandit, and I want to give him the last 2 minutes. Mr. Sushil Pandit, why don't you remind Mr. Kamar Chima and many others who claim this to be a human rights issue, the quote-unquote credentials of Yasin Malik, the convicted terrorist in this country?
Thank you, Anusha. First of all, Pakistan trying to give lessons in democracy, human rights, secularism, equality to anyone in the world is a joke. And the gumption they display in publicly uttering these words while not looking at their own record is in itself hypocrisy of the highest kind. As far as Yasin Malik is concerned, this man is a self-confessed mass killer. He has killed the leading lights of Hindu community to terrorize us. He killed them in cold blood, in point-blank range. He abducted hapless women, defenseless women, and had them gang raped. He has 28 FIRs of heinous crimes pending against him. I think not just prosecuting him, we must prosecute those who have stalled prosecution against him. We must prosecute those who issued him a passport despite these crimes. We must prosecute those who who allowed him to go to Pakistan and get married to Mushaal Hussain while he was facing prosecution in India. We must prosecute every complicit who has given him a halo of a martyr.
India is getting disturbed. Why?
Halo of a
She's just
martyr.
asking.
Sir, it's our Mr. Kamar Chima, it's our internal matter. We have an Indian citizen in our country. Mr. Kamar Chima, listen. Mr. Kamar Chima, this is not a Pakistani national we are talking about. I would have understood had it been a Pakistani national who was being so-called prosecuted here in India, and Pakistan trying to...
Indian national.
I mean, why don't you worry about the fundamental rights in your country? Forget fundamental rights. Try saving the constitution in whatever form it exists.
Universal. It has nothing to do with nationalities.
I would be really happy if you can teach a lesson or two about that to your own government and to your own political establishment.
We can talk about Pakistan's human rights, but we were talking about how Yasin Malik is being treated.
How is he being treated?
More than 1,000
How is he being treated? He's being treated like any convict in this country would.
Our voice will be more powerful now, and you are disturbed with the voice of a woman. India
we are not disturbed. We are not disturbed with the voice of a man or a woman. This is not a woman's issue.
Women in India.
This is not a woman's issue, sir. I get your attempt to trying to make it a issue about a woman trying to seek justice for her husband. Unfortunately, it's not that. It's a terrorist who has been finally convicted in this country, and the law and the due process of law will take its own course. The attempts of Pakistan to internationalize this issue, I'm afraid, will not really work. I thank you all for joining us on the broadcast. The inclusion of Yasin Malik's wife is a clear indication that the political establishment is trying to appease the army establishment, and secondly, the anti-India propaganda is at work. We talk about that story, and here on Viewpoint, our upcoming focus is the SBI research report, a report that reveals that middle-class income has tripled since 2013. Is that really true? Is that really the substance? Joining me live on the other side are two big faces of this debate. We'll have Mr. Nilesh Shah, who's the MD of Kotak AMC and the member of the former Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. And also joining me is Deputy Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh, T.S. Singdo. Gentlemen, both of you will be with us on the broadcast. For now, we are slipping into a very short break.
Co-powered by. That too in cold blood, where scores others were injured. He is also charged with the kidnapping of the daughter of a former Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir and the sister of a former Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. So those cases are still on, and she has till date never opened her mouth against or said a single word against Yasin Malik, who finds himself incarcerated in a jail in India after being convicted properly by the courts. He is serving life imprisonment, and he has not contested those charges, or neither has he contested the sentencing. So these aspects remain. So ISI may have thought that they've got a trump card, but it may just boomerang. As far as the Indian sources are concerned, India says that Kashmir is a dead issue. The G20 in Srinagar, and 4 years later, after the abrogation of 370, as Jammu and Kashmir is fast on the path of even having assembly level elections there as a union territory very, very soon in the next year or so, then we know how far we have progressed as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. And this K narrative or Kashmir narrative and flogging this dead horse is not going to yield any results. It may just prove to be counterproductive. In fact, what sources within intel sources in India are saying is it's a reflection that the terrorist activities and fomenting terrorism on Indian soil has the blessings even of the caretaker PMO. The Prime Minister's office has these blessings, and they are all in cahoots. So non-state actors, that entire aspect itself gets demolished with the appointment of Mrs. Malik as part of the special team of the caretaker Prime Minister. All these appointments are done by the military deep state. Technically now, until February, till there are elections in Pakistan, it's the military deep state and the military establishment that is quasi-running affairs in Pakistan. And if these are their priorities, one only knows what their intent is and what their intentions are. So this is also a message to the Indian polity that there cannot be any talking peace with Pakistan.
Right, and Anand, if we specifically talk about an association with the ISI, this essentially is also being looked at as Pakistan Prime Minister's office bid to save ISI from being irrelevant or completely non-performing. How does one associate these two aspects when it is about the appointment of Mushaal Malik?
Well, the ISI has had a string of failures. First up, they had no clue that 370 is being abrogated and they couldn't do anything. Over the last 4 years, whatever they have tried has failed. They are losing any kind of support on ground because that narrative has failed. So much so in Pak-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, all the way up to Baltistan and Gilgit, all those regions, there are people who are turning around and saying, we are better off with India, we don't want you anymore. and the atrocities, the entire coinage of ye jo dehshatgardi hai, iske piche vardi hai, has been coined in POJK itself, and it's aimed at the Pakistan military establishment. So it's a slew of setbacks for the ISI, to the level to which that the Arab nations, the Islamic nations, and the erstwhile ally America, they have all turned their backs and saying this is all a dead thing and you have been proven ineffective. So for the ISI, this is very bad PR. So this is one last desperate attempt to try and get some currency. They are hoping that Mushaal Malik could go there and perhaps raise some funds for them for their so-called jihad, and also raise funds from nations who may find certain empathy, or she may be able to evoke certain amount of empathy or sympathy from them. But again, the Indian side or the intel sources here believe it's a lost cause. It's not going to put any more on that. They have actually stamped their approval on all terrorism that has been fomented on Indian soil having state backing. This move itself shows that Pakistan's activity on Indian soil is state backed. There is no concept of non-state actors at all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Anand, and explaining that point beautifully when it is about the appointment of Mushaal Malik as far as the caretaker cabinet in Pakistan is concerned. We have our eyes on the story. The India Association, however, right now is not getting much response. We did try to actually pose that question to Mehbooba Mufti, but she's decided to stick to what concerns the country and not what is happening in Pakistan. We leave it at that. We're slipping into a very, very short break. We're coming right back with lots more that's happening on CNN News 18. The CNN News 18 exclusive. Now we are learning that Mushaal Malik's entry to Pakistan PMO is just to give a face saving to ISI. And this is as per sources. We are given to understand that Mushaal Malik has been very closely working with the top brass of the Pakistani army and also the ISI. I have my colleague Anand Narsimhan to offer more perspective on this big piece of breaking news that we have on the broadcast. But before we go to him, let's actually offer more inputs on what we are learning through this exclusive news break. Now, we are given to understand that Mushaal Malik was working for the Kashmir division of the ISI very, very closely. Remember, Yasin Malik has been detained. He has been sentenced to life imprisonment in a terror funding case in Kashmir. We are also given to understand that Mushaal Malik in fact stays in Islamabad, and this she does in an ISI safe house, and this has been on for a very, very long time, and she's staying there with her young daughter, who has spoken against the Pakistan occupied Kashmir Assembly, against India. And we have these several instances that also talk about Mushaal Malik, association with Pakistani army, and more importantly, Pakistan Intelligence Agency, the ISI. And the fact that she is working very, very closely on the Kashmir division of the ISI also raises a lot of eyebrows. Remember, this is also a major snub that the Pakistan
And now to another important story of the day. A State Bank of India research report reveals the growth in the average income of middle-class Indians in the past decade. The report predicts a promising future, with the average income anticipated to exceed by 7 times by 2047. This growth will result from a combination of factors, including more individual filing taxes and a shift in the distribution of tax filers from the lower to the higher income brackets. Now, armed with this report, the BJP claims the vindication on the economic front, asserting that Indian middle class has expanded, incomes have gone up, and on the economic front, the key attacks coming in from the opposition are unsubstantiated. In contrast, the opposition parties contend that the research has not factored in inflation and various other factors, and it is far too early, or it's jumping to a conclusion to argue that the incomes for the middle class have tripled. How much of substance really exists in this report? The Prime Minister has also written about it. We talk about all of these facets on Viewpoint tonight.
के आर्थिक संकट और कंटक को पछाड़ करके भारत जो है वो सबसे तेजी से बढ़ती हुई अर्थव्यवस्था साबित हुई है, तो निश्चित तौर से हर व्यक्ति पर इसका असर पड़ेगा, इम्पैक्ट पड़ेगा।
It's not a very surprising term. The question is what's happening to the rest of India. Okay, middle class is what, about 10, 15, 20, 25% of India. There are very, very serious reports that real wages, which is real wages of unskilled and skilled labour, has actually been going down. The kind of growth that we are seeing in the economy is not being reflected both in agriculture and in agricultural labour.
Well, the key argument that this particular report makes is about the middle class in this country, that the incomes for middle class have increased. Let's come to the definition. Let's talk about it threadbare. What exactly is middle class? Is there actually a definition that exists for it? The average income boom, what should be that income increase for us to conclude anything? Here is what the SBI report says. Now in 2014, India's weighted mean income was about 4.4 lakh crore rupees. By 2023, it has risen to about 13 lakh crore rupees and it is projected to further increase to about 49.7 lakh rupees. Look at these numbers. Now this should be read with two factors in mind. One is the fact that yes, the incomes are rising, people are earning more. That's the hallmark of any developing nation, an aspirational nation like India. The second is also the factor that more people have now come under the quote-unquote formal economy. About 70% of Indian economy is quote-unquote informal, which has been out of the tax ambit in many, many ways. Experts argue that with the introduction of the GST, income tax return, tax ambit expanding, more and more people are getting quote-unquote formalized in a certain sense. Middle class income has been tripled. That is one of the claims that has been made. There is no universal definition of what middle class is. There are indicators, there are expert panels that have commented upon what exactly is the middle class. Now, household earnings between 5 lakh and 30 lakh annually. Even in the middle class, there is a categorization. What has been done? The category has been divided into seekers and strivers. These are some of the leading reports that we are citing to you. This is sometimes not taken as the official position. Seekers earn about 5 to 15 lakh and strivers earn about 15 to 30 lakh. So anything between 5 to 30, one categorizes it as a middle class. Growing at a rate of about 6.3% per year between 1995 and 2021, and the middle class represents about 31% of the Indian population. This is expected to reach 38% by 2031 and 60% by 2047. By simple deduction, this is more and more people rising from the income levels, from the lower income levels to the higher income levels. So this is largely about what exactly is middle class and what are the categorizations that have been done. Let's talk about the poverty estimates. We cannot talk about the rise in the income of the middle class without talking about the number of people who have come out of poverty. They might be two separate issues but closely interlinked to each other. The objective of any government is to ensure that more and more people come out of poverty so that they come into the bracket of what we term as middle class. Between 1993 to 94, in rural areas about 50.1%, urban areas 31.8%, across the country about 45.3%. In 2004 to 5, rural areas about 41.8%, urban areas about 25.7%, and the country roughly at 37.2% number of people coming out of poverty. 2011 to 12, rural areas about 25.7%, urban areas about 13.7%, across the country about 21.9%, a massive drop in the number of people. But I must also point out there was this huge controversy about what exactly is the poverty line. The Planning Commission at one point during the UPA was criticized because they defined and tweaked the definition of what a poverty line really is. This has always remained contested in our country. But the fact that middle class is growing is a good sign, is a healthy sign for any economy. Let's take these questions, let's take all these facets to the two big newsmakers who are joining us on Viewpoint tonight. Good evening to both of you. We have Mr. T.S. Singhdeo, who is the Deputy Chief Minister for the state of Chhattisgarh. We also have Mr. Nilesh Shah, who is the member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and the Managing Director of Kotak. Sir, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Shah, for speaking to us on the broadcast. I'll take the questions to you first. I'm sure you must have heard about this report. The Prime Minister has also written about this SBI report. Is it fair to conclude on the basis of this particular report, on the basis of the income tax returns, that the middle class in this country has expanded?
So there are three Indias in some sense. One India which has per capita GDP of France, one India which has per capita GDP of a middle income country like Indonesia, and one India which is still living at per capita GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. Undoubtedly, there is a shift of people from living standard of sub-Saharan Africa to middle income standard like Indonesia, and from middle income standard like Indonesia to developed world like France.
Right.
Obviously, there are lots of people living at sub-Saharan Africa level, but there is also a fact that a lot of people are shifting upwards, and that is what SBI report has demonstrated using income tax data. There is upward mobility for living standards in terms of per capita GDP from bottom to middle and from middle to top.
So, I understand the various categorizations within the middle class that you're making, and that leads us to a more informed discussion about the story of rising India. That's also something that the Prime Minister spoke of. But in your understanding, in your experience, as I argued earlier, there is also a lot of consolidation that has happened in Indian economy, with the more informal sectors, quote unquote, becoming formalized in many ways. The tax ambit has also increased. I go back to the SBI report. Is there data, is there substance to argue and conclude and reach to the point that there has been a rise in the income of the middle class, to put it simply to you?
Undoubtedly. And in last 10 years, India has become from 10th largest economy to 5th largest economy globally.
Yes.
We are on our way to become third largest economy over next 7 to 8 years. This growth is driven in some sense by the per capita growth in India's GDP.
Right.
So there is a remarkable movement from bottom to middle and middle to top in terms of GDP as well as per capita income in last 10 years.
So, I want to touch about the two factors that I spoke of. The increasing tax ambit, this is something that this SBI report also talks about, that more and more people are now filing tax returns. The number of people who have come forward and filed tax return has only increased with time. The fact that GST has played a huge role. Is this consolidation of the informal economy? And if yes, are we likely to see this consolidation in the future as well? And is that one aspect that we should keep in mind while reading the results of this SBI report?
So when GST was launched, there were about 60 lakh business units which were paying GST or registered under GST. Now that number is about 1.3 crore. This almost 100% plus increase in GST registered entities is due to both the things. One, some registered entities which were not paying GST earlier are now paying, and some new entities have come. As we have moved from $1.8 trillion to $3.7 trillion economy, formalization of economy has happened, but also newer ventures and newer businesses have created growth opportunity.
Absolutely. So, there's the facet of how many people have been pushed out of poverty. I certainly don't want you to talk about the politics around this issue, but one of the key arguments which is often made is that the government must substantiate, or any government for that matter must substantiate, the number of people it has been able to pull out of poverty, and only then we can make an argument that the middle class has expanded. Though these two arguments may be separate in nature but are deeply correlated and interlinked. How much merit in this argument that more and more people have been lifted out of poverty, because some argue there is not enough data to argue that?
So there are multiple ways to point out differentiated facts. There was a time when government subsidies had huge leakages, whether it was 50% or 80%, that is anybody's guess.
Right.
Today, thanks to Jan Dhan Mobile and Aadhaar, direct benefit transfer is possible. Government benefits reach out to intended recipients and leakages have practically become zero. Undoubtedly, when benefits reach to recipients, it results into lifting out of poverty.
Right.
The second thing is per capita GDP. If we look at per capita GDP from below $2,000, it is now $2,600.
That's right.
Some have benefited more, some have benefited less. But undoubtedly, the entire Indian ship has been lifted.
Yes.
On one side, we are providing free food to 80 crore Indians because of COVID pandemic. Now that also will mean reduction in poverty as more people are able to get nutrition.
Okay.
In India, whatever you say, opposite is also true because as I mentioned, there are three Indias.
Yes.
Some people enjoying French level per capita GDP, some people enjoying Indonesian level per capita GDP, and many people, unfortunately, suffering from sub-Saharan Africa GDP. If you look at them, you will feel like India is poor and backward. If you look at other side, you realize that India has indeed moved forward.
Sir, you talk about the different level of poverty, sub-Saharan African level of poverty. How many people we've been able to pull out from those levels of poverty? I believe that should be a point of discussion as we talk about rising India.
So instead of looking at past, we should look at future. Why are poor people in India? Well, in 1980, India and China were similar in per capita GDP. Today, China is 5.5 times bigger than us. China became manufacturer to the world. We were left behind. Now, fortunately, the bus which we missed in 1980 is available again.
Right.
Globally, people want to shift their business out of China because of China +1 policy pursued by Western world.
Right.
We have to ensure that this time we don't miss that bus. All the global companies, we bring them to India, help them set up their large factories, create jobs, create development, create growth, and ensure that everyone is lifted below poverty line to above poverty line. I think the biggest opportunity for India today is to become manufacturer to the world, capturing China +1 opportunity.
Right.
If we can create 10-15 crore jobs and shift people from agriculture to manufacturing services, that will change India's growth orbit and move a lot of people from sub-Saharan Africa level GDP to middle income GDP.
So, absolute pleasure always to listen to you, but I'll reiterate on the first question that I'd asked you as we began this discussion. Is it fair to conclude on the basis of a report whose core data are the income tax returns that the income levels for the middle class has increased, or perhaps we need more data for that?
So undoubtedly in India, income tax is not paid uniformly or inequality by all. Salaried class income tax compliance is comparable to Western world. But in agriculture, there is no tax. There are many farmers who are earning crores of rupees and are not paying any tax, so we will never know what's happening on agriculture side.
Right.
On business, tax compliance is improving, but it is still comparable to African nation standards, not comparable to Asian nation standards. So income tax is giving us directionally what is happening. Through better compliance in business and full compliance in salaried class, it demonstrates that in India, more people are becoming richer and are paying tax. But there is still a reasonable part of parallel economy where many people are not paying their fair share of tax.
All right, sir, it's an absolute pleasure to always have you on the broadcast. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and thoughts with us on the show. We have another esteemed guest joining us here on Viewpoint tonight. We have Mr. K.V. Subramanian, who's the former Chief Economic Advisor. He's with us on the show. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Always a pleasure to have you. I'm sure you must have heard about the SBI report. I hope you've had the opportunity to go through it. But the moot point that this report makes is that the income levels are rising for the middle class. And this is based on the data that was provided by the income tax return or the income tax records that have really come in. Your preliminary thoughts on this report, how valid is this assertion in your expertise?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Look, we have to first factor in that any prediction about the future is often affected by some uncertainty.
Right.
I think with that caveat, I would say that the projections that are being made by the SBI report are quite reasonable. One thing that I know very well, having tracked the work that Soumya Kanti Ghosh does, he does use, brings in new data sets to bring in, fresh perspectives. I'll try and complement, what the SBI report says using some thoughts of my own, but from a macroeconomic side. If you look at it from a macroeconomic side, India's, in the next 20-25 years, India is an incredibly sweet spot from the perspective of the demographics. In a situation where China's population is going to be declining in the next 20-25 years, the advanced economies all have aging population.
That's right.
India is going to be in this incredible sweet spot for the next 20-25 years. Now, many people will contend that can become a liability, but the steps that have been taken, especially on manufacturing sector growth, because manufacturing sector growth is incredibly important for job creation in the economy. And in the next 25 years, that will be a big driver of job creation and thereby the creation of middle class. I'll give you one example. If you take, for instance, Detroit in the state of Michigan in the United States, the entire city was created by jobs that were provided by the three automobile majors. So in a similar way, when manufacturing sector jobs will get created, the demographics, the sweet spot that we have will indeed become a dividend. And overall, we can expect about 7% growth, 6.5% to 7% growth, in real terms going forward. And that will make a big difference, when you're talking about 25 years, because the power of compounding actually makes a big difference there.
The power of compounding, absolutely. And the demographic dividend that India has, that's also one thing that the report talks about. But I want you to touch upon these aspects, not inviting a political comment in any way. But one of the key criticism of this growth story, or the people who are skeptical about India's growth story, is that you don't have data to argue how many people you have pushed out of poverty, or the fact that the incomes have risen along with inflation. That's a factor that needs to be accounted into. Could you help us understand the correlation between inflation and the rising incomes, and how should that be understood?
See, here I think we can speak with very good data, because when you look at inflation, we get monthly data. If you look at the average, average inflation from 1960 to 2020, that average inflation was 7.2%. Just as a comparison, United States, during the same period, 60-year period, their average inflation was 2%.
That's right.
Now, because of the way in which India handled the economy, and, I was incredibly privileged to be part of that team that actually was able to, think through this. India's inflation actually is less than its historical average. I do keep in mind the latest print that has come 7.4%. It's a lot more because of food inflation. But overall, if you look at the trends, our inflation has actually been much lower than the advanced economies, which are facing anywhere between 2.5 to 4 times the historical average inflation. And this is with a growth that is actually likely to be of 7.5% plus. In FY23. So when you project from this going forward, and let me come to the jobs part, and I think that is something that there is a lot of bad a sort of narrative making on employment in particular in India. I would go by the PLFS data because that is official data, which has been, the methodology has really been approved. Unfortunately, a lot of people comment using the extremely unreliable, noisy CMI data. If you go by the PLFS data, and we covered this in the economic surveys that I wrote as well, from 2017-18 to 2019-20, the number of people who are salaried workers, or drawing are in the formal sector, drawing salaried a salary, that had increased by almost by 15 million, and of that about 7 million was females, which was a growth of about 30%, and 8 million among males. So on the employment, I think for various reasons the narratives are actually are very poor. But when you look at the data, a lot misinformed. And I think misinformed, and oftentimes there are a few who actually, unfortunately also want to sort of push the wrong narratives. But the data speaks for itself. And I also would mention that if you look at the PLFS data again, post-COVID, there has been very good recovery, except for females where the recovery was not very V-shaped. So the decline was steep, but then gone up. But if you look at all the measures,
and who better than you to remind the political parties or the people or anybody who's loosely commenting about the force of data? Mr. Subramanian, it's always very enlightening, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Thank you so much for putting all the details into perspective. That was Mr. K.V. Subramanian talking about the report that has come out from the SBI. Thank you, sir, for joining us this evening. Let me quickly cut across to Mr. T.S. Singh Deo as well, the Deputy Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh. Sir, first, your initial thoughts on this report. Do you agree? BJP argues middle class income has grown.
I don't know what conclusions they want to draw. If it is just a matter of statistics, which indicates that the people taking loans from the SBI or the data with the SBI indicates that the mean income level has gone up compared to 2013. Well, that is data which probably cannot be refuted. As far as there are other imputations or computations or projections that would be made, that could be a matter of discussion.
But sir, in the run-up to 2024, one of the key arguments that was made by the opposition party, including the rights of Rahul Gandhi, is that the economy has not done well, and more importantly, this government has not delivered on tangible front like jobs, employment, inflation, and various other facets. So, with this report and the assertion of the government, does the criticism of the opposition still hold?
For me, inflation, unemployment, and the economic factors are very important, but for me, they are not the most important, frankly. For me, the most important factor would be the fabric, the political fabric, the social fabric, the religious fabric of the country, which is extremely stressed today. Constitutional issues that are being raised, for me, they are extremely important. So is the economic condition, undoubtedly. But is that the only issue on which the opposition will go to the elections? I do not think it will have such a limited view. There are many, many pressing issues, very basic issues that reflect upon and which have the potential to disturb the country as we have known it, constitutionally, socially, religiously, regionally. Those are the issues, I think, which should be number one, and certainly following close behind would be issues that affect the individual, which is the economic aspect.
Mr. T.S. Singh Deo, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. While the jury might be out, most of the people who understand data and statistics would argue that economy has done well on various indicators. Well, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Viewpoint. Plain Speak follows with Shivani Gupta. Thank you for watching.
Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his independence speech just gone by, had said that his government's initiatives have lifted 13.5 crore Indians out of poverty and has helped them become a part of the new middle class emerging in India. State Bank of India has now released its research report which is backing the Prime Minister's claims. The report was based on individual tax filing data which showed that average income of India's middle class has jumped from 4.4 lakh rupees in 2014 to 13 lakh rupees in 2023. And that over 13% of those below 5 lakh per annum income are now in the higher brackets. Not only this, the report also predicted that middle class average income would jump to 49.7 lakhs by 2047. But since the state of the economy is a matter of a political battle, especially in the run-up to the general elections, a political war has also broken over this report, where Congress has on one side claimed credit for the growth and also